Eric Liu is going to join us now. Eric is a friend in many ways. He runs something called Citizens University now, but he used to work in the Clinton White House. He's done many different things. He's also a violinist. And Eric is going to do a form of recap and an audience challenge to all of you. So I want you to stay tuned right now for Eric. And we're also going to be setting up Music Corps, the wonderful Wounded Warrior Band out of Walter Reed, to follow as our grand finale. But right now, I want to give you Eric Liu.
You need this? I got it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Damien. And let me just ask everybody here, because now we're in the home stretch here, let me invite you actually to stand if you can, and just stretch for a second. Okay? Reach up high. Reach up high and stretch. We've been talking about embodiment all day here. We are going to embody this spirit of both incredible receiving of knowledge and wisdom, but also kind of letting it move and circulate through our whole body. So with that, please be seated. As we were joking about earlier today, let me just, I've been given the unenviable task of synthesizing. Well, it seemed unenviable at the outset, but I would actually say it's incredibly easy, because of the way that Damien and his team and colleagues have curated our time together and the mindfulness with which each of our speakers and performers has been with us. They have all done the job in a great way. They have begun to connect the dots on their own. They have pulled out themes and threads of connection across the words and ideas that each has heard and said and shared. And, well, I just want to say by way of framing. So, as Damien said, my name is Eric Liu. I founded an organization called Citizen University, and more recently have just joined the Aspen Institute, directing a new program on citizenship and American identity. And, you know, Damien and I have worked together a ton prior to my joining Aspen and in continuing ways. But one of the things that I think was so important about the way this summit was designed, even though it's just called the Art Summit, was recognizing that there is no such thing as an arts conversation. There is no such thing as the practice of art. There is no such thing as even the imagining of art without activating or implicating or reckoning with citizenship. And that is a fact that we have heard all day long in 100 different ways. And my job here today is to pull out some themes that I think all of our speakers and performers and many of you who have contributed to the conversation have already brought to the surface, and then really help us make some sense of what we're learning and experiencing here. So there were three themes in particular that I wanted to pull out that really are about what art is, what art does, what art gives, in a civic context in particular. And the three themes are these. First, integration. Second, the embodiment of patterns. And third and finally, practicing power. I just want to say a word about each of these themes because they are so important to why we're here and the challenge of being here and why this is more than just simply a day of wonderful, incredibly tasty and delicious spectatorship. But this is a day of priming ourselves for citizenship. So this first theme of integration. Now, there's a couple ways we as Americans can hear the word integration. Of course, in this 50th anniversary year of Selma, this 50th anniversary year of the Civil Rights Act being enacted, you can think about integration in an American civil rights context. You can think about it as desegregation. But what we've been hearing all day long is a deeper sense of integration. And that is this notion of no separation into categories. Everybody you heard, from Alan Kay to Spike Lee just now, David Rubenstein at the beginning, all the performances we heard were about the ways in which, Justice Sotomayor, the ways in which we are both naturally driven to want to compartmentalize and categorize, but if we are to be fully human, we have to resist that natural temptation. That there is no separation into categories between private and public, properly speaking. That there is no separation meaningfully between art and science. That there is no separation into categories between politics and emotions, between passion and reason, between ideas and our bodies. even at a place like the Aspen Institute, which is famed and fabled for its thought leadership, particularly with Damien's arrival, we don't think of ourselves as just little idea bubbles. We don't think of our bodies as the conveyance vehicles for our brains. We understand the ways in which, as individuals, our ideas and bodies are connected, but we certainly understand that as the body politic. Someone said earlier today, I cannot cut off the hand. I cannot cut off the arm. A principle as old as the Bible, a principle as old as humanity itself. We are one body. We are integrated. And art reminds us of that in the most elemental way. And it reminds us of that in ways that, of course, activate our humanity. But again, in an American context, it activates our citizenship. Because the point of this country, and I say this as the child of immigrants. My parents were born in China. I, in many ways, embody the American dream. But I represent before you hybridity. I am nothing but a jumble and a mix and a mashup of all kinds of influences. Yes, some are Confucian, but some are Jewish, some are African American, some are English. This mashup of influences, this notion of hybridity is embodied here in one person. It's been embodied in many of our speakers. In fact, it's been embodied in all of our speakers, whether or not they looked like what people used to think Americans looked like. But this hybridity is so central to our notion of what it means to be American. Several people have referred today to the wonderful new musical Hamilton, right? Which, in addition to being just a breathtaking piece of historical fiction on stage, is literally the most mashed up of mashups you'll ever find, of genres, of fact and fiction, of fable, of the mythical and the historical and the particular and the universal, of the playful and the deeply, deeply, deadly serious. That's as American a piece of art as you'll find, and that's as American a statement of citizenship as you'll find. And so this spirit of integration, which we've been feeling and hearing and practicing and breathing all day, is what it means to be American. There's another word for integration in that sense: jazz. The blues, right? We've talked a lot today about languages, and yes, the invention of language was probably the last great thing humanity did, but it's also been a long time since anybody invented a language. Guess what? America invented a language. We invented a language called the blues. We invented a language called jazz. And that language takes a literal form of Louis Armstrong or Charlie Parker or Mingus or Bird or whatever. But it takes a figurative form as well, the jazz of American life. What the great scholar, African-American scholar, Charles Murray called omni-America. Albert Murray, not Charles Murray, actually. Charles is quite different. What Albert Murray called omni-America. And what I think of as omniculturalism. We're not about multiculturalism. We're not about having 8 or 9 or 10 different color-coded buckets from which you can take a ladle and say, oh, I like this. I'll have a little scoop of that. We are omnicultural. And that's not the melting pot. That is a continuous generation, regeneration of hybrids heretofore unseen on planet Earth. That's the American purpose. And that is expressed in no better way than in art. Because the point of art and the way art moves forward is through this kind of hybridity and this kind of integration and this refusal adamantly to separate into categories. That's theme number 1. Theme number 2, which flows right out of this, is this embodiment of patterns. It's a great book I stumbled upon in a bookstore once, I think written in the 60s, during the age when all different professions were being kind of transformed by a democratizing bottom-up spirit of small is beautiful. It's a book by a group of urban planners and architects called A Pattern Language. And it was just basically breaking down urban life and architecture into the language, into how blocks are, into how streets are, into how alleyways are, into how yards are, into how people experience one another in space, and how that can be done not just accidentally or mindlessly, but quite intentionally. Well, art is our pattern language. And we've been hearing all day, whether it's coming into art through politics, or coming into art through technology, coming into art in the ways that Megan and Alan synthesized in such powerful, inspiring ways, we're learning a language when we learn art. And that language is not only about self-expression, right? I think the thing that struck me so powerfully when Oster described the way in which, if you properly read any Shakespearean play, and you think about how characters, for instance, fall in love, they never do so in isolation. We are always woven into a fabric of relationship and obligation. And yes, that sounds kind of Confucian coming from me saying that, right? That runs kind of against an American narrative of rugged individualism, but when you stop and think about it, that's all it means to be human, to be woven into a fabric of a relationship and obligation. And art reminds us of the pattern language of that kind of interdependence. Art reminds us of a pattern language in America of argument. Of argument. What I love just even about this last panel here, and the ways in which we had participants in our audience challenging our panelists, challenging the very structure of our day. That's a great thing. That is a pattern language of argument that Americans learn half-consciously, but we internalize it, and art embodies that 100 different ways. It doesn't matter what form of art. The great American arguments about central power versus power in the periphery, about big versus small government, about whether to be color conscious or color blind. These deep, enduring American arguments are embodied 100 different ways in the patterns of art. This capacity that Alan Kay talked about, to be able to distinguish not only between text and context, but to be able to pop out of your context. Whoops! Uh-oh, wow, right? That to me is a statement not only about how scientific discovery is made or how works of art end up getting created, moments of inspiration convert into imagination, which when applied becomes creativity, and if really good, become innovation. It's not just about that pipeline of activity. The whoops moment is itself the result of a practiced pattern. As Americans, we live in places like Chicago. We live in places like Seattle, where I'm from. And the point of being a citizen of a city is to run into the unexpected, is to encounter the things that you were not prepared for, is to be surprised and suddenly realize that what you thought was flat land was actually three-dimensional land, that what you thought was black and white was actually technicolor. And that pattern recognition and that ability to see and to challenge pre-existing patterns is something that art, again, does for us. Which brings me to the third and the final theme that I think we really were talking about today, which is the practice of power. I'd been keeping notes all day long as Damien had been asking me, just listening intently. In a way, my day here today was sort of the equivalent of what Sarah was describing of, staring at a painting for 3 hours, right? I wasn't staring, but I was listening hard to you for 7 hours, right? And it struck me till actually almost after lunch that the word power had not yet been uttered, right? And then, I don't know what happened at lunch, but then power started getting talked about all the time, right? And that's great. We caught up with ourselves. And there is something kind of microcosmic about that, right? Americans, well, most people don't like to talk about power. It's an uncomfortable topic. Almost every connotation that we have with power is sort of a negative one. Power trip, power hungry, power mad. And in a democratic society like this, where everybody's supposed to be equal, we don't particularly find it easy to acknowledge the ways in which, actually, I'm more powerful than you. Sorry. Or actually, you're way more powerful than me, and that sucks, and you didn't earn it. Right? We haven't until recently been so comfortable at talking about that. But recently, whether it's taken a hashtag with a human being's name after it, whether it's taken images on CNN of buildings afire, whether it's taken my friends across the political spectrum, from the fast food forward and $15 now movement, or from the Tea Party, organizing and activating and saying, we don't like the status quo, we don't like the patterns that we inherited, we don't like the ways in which the grid has settled into a status quo, and we're going to challenge it. All of that is a beautiful thing. All of that is a form of artistry, of citizen artistry. Now, some of these folks are literally artists. Some of the great stuff that's happening in the $15 now movement literally invokes visual art and street theater and performance in different ways that is incredibly moving. Black Lives Matter, you bet, is an artistic movement as well as a political one. But I'm not even talking about the literal activation of these forms of art. I'm just saying to be alive in this moment and to be awake and aware as a citizen is to be an artist. If you are willing to become fluent, literate in power. Someone's phrase, I jotted down, I can't recall whose it was, of fluent participation is the point. Fluent participation requires literacy in power. Understanding who has power and who has not, who does not. Understanding why that is, where these forms of power come from, and what ways art can be used both to challenge those prior allocations of power, to question those prior allocations of power, and what ways art, frankly, can reinforce those forms of power. The fact that, I'm not even sure whose painting it was, sold for the record amount that it did this week, is, as you saw, many of you saw the piece in the New York Times, both an interesting art section story, but an incredibly telling story about where we are in the United States today, in this second Gilded Age that we are living through. In this age where an incredible concentration of wealth, of opportunity, of possibility itself is making it harder and harder even for art and voice to challenge this system. These things, these ideas of integration, of embodying the patterns of what it means to be part of a complex, interdependent system in which no man is truly an island, in which nobody gets to be a rugged individualist. And finally, our ability and our willingness to practice and become fluent in power. These have been the themes of our day. And these are the responsibilities of all of us. And if you go down a tick list of responsibilities, which is also a word that only started getting used kind of late in the day, to bridge divides of understanding, to activate empathy, to be able to decode texts and recode texts, to ensure that people do not live sheltered lives of helicopter parenting or helicopter citizenship, to get out of our bubbles, to reckon with, again, I can't remember whose phrase this is, the cost of our rights. I can go down a tick list like this and ask you, this is a job description I've just given you. And so the question is the job that you're applying for artist or citizen? And the answer is yes. The answer is absolutely yes. The answer in this moment, actually, in our country's history of incredible racial, economic, and other kinds of inequity is hell yes. That our job right now, as artists and as citizens, is to see without categories and to make sure that we begin to be contributing to this next chapter of the American experiment. So with that, I don't know, Damien, if we do have time, if you want to bring in a little conversation, or if we should segue straight to our friends at Music Corps.
Why don't we do 5 minutes?
Okay, so what we'd like to do, what we wanted to do was just, this is an opportunity. It's obviously, I'm neither a panel nor am I here to represent the panelists, but an opportunity for rapid fire, popcorn style, just reactions, thoughts, inspirations, things that you have been hearing and noticing all day, the things that you've underlined and circled 6 times in your notes as the day has gone on, just so that we can all light each other a little bit more and kind of in embodied form, kind of activate the synaptic connections in the collective wisdom of this room. So I know we have the microphones ready to pass around here again, and we've got the first one right here. And just real quick, and we're going to just move around.
Briefly. We are in Washington. 2 words I'm going to throw out there: power and influence. Few can have power, but many can have influence. And I think that if we understand that, we all can have that citizen artist influence, although few may have power to actually make the decisions. Behind the scenes, we know here in Washington, influence is what may really count.
Great, thank you. I'm going to head up to this side here.
Thank you very much to both of your organizations. I'm head of an organization called Legacy Mission. We make videos for people with life-threatening illnesses as a gift to their children, and I came to be inspired. And Ms. Woodard, I was really inspired by what you said. We are all artists. Some of us surrender more to the creative spirit. Thank you for that. And one of the poets in the group said, "I am not the kind of fire that you can put out." And I think that really resonated.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Yes. We had one right over here. Is the microphone? Is there just one mic, or is there? Okay, great.
I think we need to talk more, and we've touched it, but last year actually it was more focused on access. The 99% not having access, you know, and Michelle Obama's recent comments about who really is involved in the arts.
It's great.
We have one up at the middle here.
Oh, great.
Hi,
Thank
yes,
you.
my name is Jacqueline Lawton, and I'm a playwright, a professor at UNC in Chapel Hill, and also the Diversity, Inclusion, Equity curator for Theater Communication Group. And what I want to lift up and voice is cacophony of voices, access and opportunity, and power, money, and how do we flatten plantation pyramids to create a more democratic structure in which there's access for every single individual to stand in their voice and their presence.
Thank you. I'm going to take a couple more. One over here. Oh, we'll start right over here since the mic is here, and then we'll come over to you.
I've been impressed with the entire day, but I would like to give a shout out to Miss Woodard, who I think hit the nail on the head when it comes to young people in this country who are underserved. And she said, see them, let them see you. She put her hands on them. She recognized them, because if you don't recognize them, they feel you have no expectations. You give people, young people especially, the expectations, and they will rise to meet those expectations. And it was a beautiful point that you made, and those of us who are involved in arts education feel the magic of your words. Thank you.
One right up here, and I want to make sure we also hear from if we have any of our young poets with us still too. Yeah, we'll come around. But yes, please.
Yes, I think this was a fabulous event, day-long event, worth the time. I just had two thoughts I'm taking home with me today. One is when we talk about the theme of revenge, I wonder if it's more a hunger for justice. And that's one question that I'm taking home with me, as well as when we talk about context, in a cultural context, is sometimes it's not always universal. Sometimes it's very specific. And how do we understand those specific cultural contexts?
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm not a young poet. I'm not even an old poet. But I'm Cynthia Schneider from Georgetown University. I wanted to raise or maybe reinforce the relationship between culture and identity and put that in an international context, which I know hasn't been the focus, but just to raise one issue that I think perversely points to the incredible power of culture, and that is the way it is attacked all over the world by extremists. And I would just pose one question. They recognize that culture is the root of identity, and they need to destroy it to have absolute power over people. And I just wonder why the people who defend, independence, freedom, human rights, and all these things don't recognize the power of culture in the same way.
Thank you. One last time. Carlin, why don't we give you the last word here? I think a mic is coming your way. Here it comes.
I just really appreciate the opening of this summit. I think that it was wonderful that it started off with something as radical as juking, and it set the tone for it, for us to expect the unexpected and for us to open our minds up to what will be heard and what will be seen today. So I just really appreciate that opening.
Thank you. Well, let me just say, by way of closure and then introducing our final performance here, several of your notes of inspiration and thoughts and reflections here I think are themselves incredibly powerful. But this idea, there are three words that you just all said that really struck me. This idea of the underserved. I have a friend who's a longtime arts advocate in Seattle where I live, Vivian Phillips, some of you may know her, who said a great line once that I have used over and over again, not just in an arts context, but a civic one as well, and that is that the underserved are the uninvited. Right? And there are 100 ways, there are countless ways in which we are uninviting or failing to invite people. Right? So I think rather than thinking of people as underserved, as if as if the point of their existence is to be served and they are just malnourished in that, it's a question of invitation. Which goes to the second notion. You're absolutely right that the comment here about how other cultures around the world, particularly those that are, well, threatened by or sense a challenge from many of the ideals and norms that are embedded in American culture, American art, American ideas, they do get the power of culture potentially. But I think the thing to remember in particular is a lot of these places, and frankly there are plenty of our fellow citizens in the United States who share this worldview, there are people who long for a forever lost dream of purity, a fundamentalist dream of purity. It just ain't going to happen, right? The genetic genie, the mimetic genie, every genie is out of the bottle, right? And so purity is gone. And so the only question is, what will we make of impurity? Which I think brings me to the third and the final idea and the purpose then of inclusion. People have used the word inclusion or inclusiveness or inclusivity many times during this day. And I think it's really important for us to flip the frame of how we talk about inclusion. Because, one of the great things about American life over the last generation is that we all have been kind of trained in corporations, in higher ed institutions, in different places to do a thing. It's on a poster all the time. It happens here in May because it's Asian American Heritage Month. It happened in February, which is African American Heritage Month, which is and the phrase is this: celebrate diversity. Right? So this little two-word motto represents both progress and the next wall we have to bust through. Right? It represents progress because 25 years ago, people were not saying celebrate diversity. Right? When Spike Lee had to scrape and struggle to get a film out, it was just acknowledge diversity. Right? See diversity. Right? And a lot of our institutions have begun to recognize that we should celebrate diversity. But now the question and the challenge and the opportunity for us is not how to celebrate diversity, but to celebrate what we make of diversity, what we do with it. Right? There's another program at the Aspen Institute called the Franklin Project, which is about championing the idea of national service in the United States. Right? And on the notion that, as General Stanley McChrystal has said, in this decade of wars that we've had, 99% of us, literally, 99% of Americans have gotten to practice citizenship, as he puts it, on the cheap. And there's been another 1% that's been overlooked in all of our 99 versus 1% conversations here, and that is the 1% of Americans who have put on the uniform. Today, as it happens, I don't know if this was planned by Damien, but today is Armed Forces Day. And I think one of the frames we have to flip is for those of us in that 99% who have not served in this decade's wars, who have not paid those kinds of sacrifices, is frankly to do more than celebrate their service, is to do more than just say at a ball game or an airport, thank you for your service, right? That's the equivalent of the two-word motto. Like, okay, that's better than just ignoring them, but that does not cut it anymore, right? Because what's embedded in the quick and reflexive and then kind of out of your head, thank you for your service, is a view that is essentially a form of guilt. A view that this tiny minority of Americans has done the heavy lifting for this country. And so we want to put forward two storylines about them. Either they are heroes who walk on water, or they are victims who are so pitiable and need our help and compassion, right? There's no question that there are countless numbers of veterans of these wars who fit one or both of those categories. But here's the thing, I would submit to you, none of them want to be defined by either of those categories. There's a third category here. There's a third way of thinking about them, not as heroes, not as victims, but as assets, as contributors to civic life here at home now, as people who are going to, on Armed Services Day and every day, remind the rest of us what it means actually to show up as a citizen in Chicago, in Seattle, in New York, in DC, in Baltimore, in LA, and all across this land. And to embody that idea, we're going to close this day with a remarkable group of artists and citizen artists. It is a group of people from an organization called MusiCorps. MusiCorps was founded by Arthur Bloom. And MusiCorps, I think, they describe themselves as a musical rehabilitation project for veterans. And I suppose that captures some of it. But what MusiCorps really is this incredibly transformative busting of categories. It has been working with veterans of these wars, many of them grievously wounded, many of them without the sense of purpose and direction that can lead to a healthy, productive, inclusive life as civilians. And what it has done is to both reconnect them, reintegrate them into American life using the tool of music, but has also created an opening and a pathway for them to reinvigorate American life as they have become artists and musicians and shown us what it means now to participate in the life of our communities. And so Arthur Bloom is now going to be joined by members of the MusiCorps band. And please join me in welcoming this remarkable crew of artists and citizen artists.
One, two.
There's a sorrow in the wind blowing down the road I've been. I can hear it cry while shadows steal the sun. But I cannot look back now. I've come too far to turn around, 'cause there's still a race ahead that I must run. I'm only halfway home. I've got to journey on till I find the things that I have lost. I've come a long, long road. Still got some miles to go. I've got a wide river to cross. I have stumbled, I have strayed. You can trace the tracks I've made all across the memories that my heart recalls. But I'm refugee. Won't you say a prayer for me? 'Cause sometimes even the strongest soldier falls. I'm only halfway home. I've got to journey on till I find the things that I have lost. I've come a long, long road. Still got some miles to go. I got a wide river to cross. I've got a wide river to cross. Got a wide river to cross. I've got a wide river to cross. I've got a wide river to Thank you. Thank you very much. It's such an honor to be here, and it is also our honor to invite our very good friend Camille Zamora to join us for this next song. If you get too worried, what you ought to do is sing. If you get worried, what you ought to do is sing. If you get worried, what you ought to do is sing. Sing about your trouble, it just might pass. If you get lost, what you ought to do is sing. If you get lost, what you ought to do is sing. If you get lost, what you ought to do is sing. Sing about your trouble, it just might pass. Sing about your trouble, it just might pass. Sing about your sing. Sing about love and hoping it lasts. Sing about your trouble. Just my past, just my past. Oh, if you get broken, what you ought to do is sing. If you get broken, what you ought to do is sing. If you get broken, what you ought to do is sing. Sing about your trouble, it just might pass. Sing about your trouble, it just might pass. Your trouble, past. Just my past, oh, just my past, just my past, oh, you know, just my past, oh, it might just my past, just my past, oh, you know that, just my past. Just my past. Great job. You rock. That was awesome.
Okay, so what a great ending to a great day of conversation. I think Music Corps represents the very best of what the arts can represent, and what a fantastic group to have with us for the very end. What I'd like to suggest to all of you is that this is the beginning of a conversation rather than the end of our day, that this is just the end of the chapter, and that we think about what we will do and continue to talk about through the course of the next year. And I invite you all to have that dialogue with us. We'll figure out a way to do it, and we'll figure out how to tell you how we're doing it. But we really want your feedback. We want your conversation. I wrote notes to myself about the topics that we raised today that we needed to continue further, and the topics that we heard about today that could be sort of expanded on. Eric, thank you for a great summation.
Yes,
I think
thank
you did
you,
a
Eric.
really great job. I think we had a beautiful start with David Rubenstein and a response from Howard. I think each of the individuals who came and participated in the conversation offered something that we hadn't really thought about before, and that was my goal, is that we would have conversation today in a group setting with all kinds of different people from all across the country, and that we would do it in a different way. So for that, I'm really happy, and for that, I'm really grateful to my friend Damien for bringing such great thought and idea and commitment to that kind of conversation. So will you please join me in saying thank you to Damien?
Well, just to say, my partner in crime here, stay tuned for many more crimes of opportunity, because I mean, that's a word that was mentioned a few times as well, opportunity. And this was meant to be an opportunity. Opportunity to gather the range of people for the sake of the integration that's possible, and also to raise topics and mix topics in ways that are not the norm, but we feel should be, and what we hope for. And that's that whole thing, that road forward. And there are a lot of pathways that I think we started scratching out today. Some actually just kind of, I'm not even sure where to go with yet. The levels of thinking itself, the idea of how we think and how we react to things and what we can do to measure that is enormous, actually, because we're so busy doing our 1, 2, 3. We know how the scale's supposed to finish. But, I mean, if we can do anything, we can take the lessons of citizenship embodied in so many ways by someone like Arthur Bloom and what he does with Music Corps, or Camille, or frankly, all of the artists who joined us today. First of all, we should have a huge round of applause for all of the artists who participated. Thank you. Just the inspiration provided from, Alfre and Carlin with your monologues early in the day, just galvanizing us, and those great kids from Split This Rock. But Maz, with the power of comedy to cut through all of the nuance and yet have even more nuance.
Yeah.
That's that possibility. So all of the artists, thank you so much. And just the final word, the Kennedy Center embodies the principles of citizenship. It is a living memorial, and I'm so proud that we did this here today. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One more.
One more.
I want 2 more people. I want to say thank you to Betsy DeVos again for the first conversation that helped inspire this. Thank you very much, Betsy. And I'd like to ask the members of our team who are standing over here, and a couple of them in the back, to
Yes,
step
there's a
forward.
lot of-
Because Damien and I didn't do this. These guys did it. So come on forward. Where's...
And Matt and Aiden and Adam's over
and there's
there,
Adam.
and
So,
there's many
Please say
around.
thank you. The guys who actually did the hard work, Adam, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So all the speakers, all the artists, all the
Everybody.
people, let's go have a nice reception
Yep.
outside.
And there's more music on the way.
There is.
So-
More art.
Thank you for being here.